Hello everyone again. In this pre-lecture I want to introduce one more MATLAB skill, which is called conditionals, like if statements. The purpose of this is that a lot of times in your code you have a branch. Think of it like a fork in the road. You want your code to do something if under some conditions, and then you want your code to do a different thing under different conditions. So basically you want your code to test, okay, is something true? If so, do this, and if not, do something else. And that's the purpose of an if statement. So let me explain how these things work in MATLAB. These are all the skills we've talked about so far for MATLAB. And then in this pre-lecture, we want to talk about if-end statements. And then we can make them a little more sophisticated by putting if, else, else, and then end. So let's talk about how this works. So the idea with conditionals, it's like do something under certain conditions. So that's why we call it a conditional. So you can think about your code going along and then basically creating a branch here. So is something true? And you specify what it is. And then it's like, if yes, do this. And if no, do this. So it's like creating a branch in your code. And the command that we use to do this is called the if ... end command. So you start it with if, and then you have something which goes here, which is the thing that you're testing. So this is I'm gonna put here logical test. So basically it's a test that it's either true or it's false. And if it's true, it will execute the stuff below it. So in here you put code to execute if the test is true. So this is code to run if the test is true. And then you add here end. So that's basically telling it to end the if statement. So when the code comes through here, it reaches this line. It says, okay, let me check this, and this will be something which I'll specify later. So let me check this. If it's true, I will run all of these commands. Okay. If it's false, I skip to the end. If the test is false, skip to here. So basically I would skip over all that stuff if the test is false. Well, that's a little abstract. Here's an example. Let's do a very simple example here. So how about this one? If x is bigger than 0. So here's my test, right? So when I reach this line, the code will check the variable x. Is it bigger than 0 or is it not bigger than 0? If it is bigger than 0, we'll put in here something like, let's just print out display x is positive. Okay. And then we'll put here end. So if I run this with x being a positive variable, it will come to this line, check if x is positive. And if it is, it will print this out. And if it isn't, it will not print this out. It will just skip to the end. Let's just illustrate that using MATLAB. So here's my MATLAB. I've created a script called my first conditional here. So it's going to be the first practice with if statements. So let's just type in that exact statement which I just mentioned. So if, and then x is bigger than 0. And I usually, when I do it, I always type the end right after, so I make sure that it matches. So if and then end. And then in here I'll put display x is positive. Just like that. Now what happens if I run this just like this? Think in your mind, before I click the run button, what is going to happen if I run this script? I'm going to get an error. Hopefully you can realize that, because it's going to come down here. It'll say if x is bigger than 0. So the computer will say, is x bigger than 0? Let me check. What is x? And you know I haven't defined x anywhere, so I'll get an error because if x is bigger than 0, it doesn't know what x is. Right? So it says undefined function of variable x. So let's put in, for example, let's put in x is equal to 12, something like this. So now I defined x. And what will happen now is it'll come to here, it'll say, is x bigger than 0? And it's let me check, what is x? It's 12. That's bigger than 0. Okay, good. So then I'm going to display x is positive. So if I run it, it says x is positive. If I put in here x is equal to minus 0.35, something like this, now it'll say, is x bigger than 0? Let me check, what is x? Minus 0.35. Okay, that's not bigger than 0. So we'll skip over this, skip to the end. So if I run this, I get nothing out. Okay, so that's a very simple if statement. What if you want to check multiple conditions? You know, it can, I mean, of course I could write another if statement. I could say, I could do something if x is positive and something if x is negative, and I could write another if statement, but there's a better way of doing it. So let's put here testing multiple conditions. So I can make my if statement a little more extensive or sophisticated. And it looks kind of like this. So if, and then I'll put here test 1. So there's something that I'm testing first. And then if that is true, I will execute these lines here. So let me put here ... So this will be the code to execute if test 1 is true. But then maybe I want to do something else if another condition is true. So then I will put here else if, all one word, else if, and then another test. So let me put here test 2. And then maybe I have some code that I want to run here. And so this will be code to execute if test 1 is false, but test 2 is true. Okay, so if test 1 is true, it will go into this part. If test 1 is false, it'll skip to here, and then it will check test 2, and if that's true, it'll do this part. Okay? And you can keep just adding more and more here. So I could add like another test, which would be like else if test 3. And then I would have code to execute if both of the previous ones are false. So this is code to execute if test 1 is false and test 2 is false. But test 3 is true. You get the idea. I could keep adding more and more of these. Then I can add here else. So without the if. Else means it's like a catch-all. That means that if all of the above things are false, I will do this. So this is code to execute if test 1, test 2, and test 3 are all false. And then I will end this whole thing with the command end. So this is all a bunch of tests, right? And depending on the results of each test, you may have different branches to your code. It's important to mention that the code will only run one of these. So for example, if test 2 is true, it'll run these, and then it'll go to the end. If test 1 and test 2 are false, but test 3 is true, then it'll run this part, and then it'll go to the end. So you can't run more than one of these sets of code in this set of commands. So only one of those sets of commands, either the one if test 1 is 2, or if test 2 is true, or test 3 is true, only one of those will be run. And once that's run, it will skip to the end. By the way, I can mention that you don't really need this. I mean, it's not required to have this. You don't have to have the code which is like the catch-all if everything fails. You could just have it skip out of the whole state, the if statement. But it's kind of nice to have it there in case, you know, if all of the above tests are false, then you can tell it what to do in that case. What if we want to make our script a little bit more sophisticated? So I want to, you know, the previous one I had, previously I had the program print out something that says if x is positive. But maybe let's make this a little more sophisticated. So what if I did something like this? If x is positive, then display x is positive. Now if that fails, that means x is not positive. So I could put here else if x is less than 0. Then I would have here x is negative. And then what if both of those fail? So if x is neither positive nor negative, what does that mean? That would mean that x is 0, right? X must be 0. So the only way that it would ever reach this third line, or this third test, is if both of the above tests fail. Okay, so if x is not positive, I will skip to here. If x is not negative, I will skip to here. And the only way that both of those could fail is if x was 0. Let's try that out. So let's modify our if statement. So we'll have if x is positive, display x is positive. Now else if, all one word, x is less than 0, disp x is negative. Else x must be 0. And then end. Don't forget to put the end there. Okay, so what will happen if x is 0.35? Maybe we can illustrate it with the breakpoint just to make it really clear what's going on. So I put the breakpoint and now I can step through the code. So I reach this point. Now let's step through. If x is positive, it'll skip over that because x is not positive. Now, is x negative? In this case, yes, so it will execute this next line. Display x as negative. And then I jump to the end after I did that. So you can see there at the bottom, x is negative. Okay. Let's do it again, but let's show what happens if x is equal to 0. So let's put x equals to 0 here. Okay, so starting here, stepping through. Is x positive? No, because it's 0. Skip over that. Is x negative? No, skip over that. Now else, because I've been through those, so that means now if I've been through these and they're false, that means I will execute this line here, which means x must be 0. Okay? So you can sort of handle all the cases this way. Very simple. Let's talk about the kind of tests you can do, right? We checked if something was positive or if something is bigger than something or less than something. So what are these are called logical operators. Basically, you know, what kind of things can I test in MATLAB? So I can test, you know, if something is bigger than something else, obviously greater than. If I want to check if something is bigger than or equal to, I just type those two, greater than or equal to. And then, of course, I've got, you know, less than or equal to. So these are all things I can test. What if I want to check if something is not equal to something? It looks like this. There's the tilde and then the equals. Not equal to. So I could do something like if x is not equal to 5, then do this. And this code would be run as long as x is not equal to 5. And if x is equal to 5, it would skip over that. So it's the tilde and then the equals that's not equal to in MATLAB. What if I want to check if something is equal to something? It comes with two equal signs, okay? Equal to. And this last one is really important because it leads to a lot of confusion, or not confusion, but I mean, it's a common mistake. If you want to test if something is equal to something else, you use two equal signs. So maybe I want to run the code like if x is equal to 12. So if x is equal to 12, do this, right? And that means like run this code if x equals 12. The single equal sign is an assignment operator. So the single equal sign tells me to store the value of 12 into x. So it's important to notice that if I want to test if something is equal to another thing, use the double equals. So note, single equals is an assignment operator. So if I type something like x equals to 12, that means store the value of 12 in x. I like to think of the single equals as being like a left pointing arrow. That means store the value of 12 into x. Okay. But if I type x equals 12, that'll give me something that's true if x is 12 and false if x is not 12. So this is a test. Is x equal to 12? And this one here is store 12 into x. Okay, so single equal, double equal mean different things in MATLAB. Very important to keep those straight. All right, so maybe I will end it here. There's a few more things that I need to still discuss, but we can do this during the lecture time. We want to talk about how can I combine tests. So maybe I want to test both, is this true and is A true and is B true? If so, do something. Or is A true or is B true, then do something. We have to talk about how to do and or statements in MATLAB, and we'll start doing that in class. Let me sum up here. I've taught you the syntax for how to run conditionals if-and statements in your code. So basically, create a branch. If something is true, do something. If something is false, do something else. And the simplest way is just using if and end. Okay, so then if, test something, and then if it's true, run this code, and if it's not, skip to the end. If you have multiple tests you want to run, you can do it a little more sophisticatedly using this elseif, else end. So if test 1 is true, do this. If that fails, try this. If test 2 is true, do this. If that fails, try this. If test 3 is true, try this. Do this. If all of those failed, skip to this else and run this. Okay? We did a very simple example of this. All right, so try it out. You can try messing around with that simple script that we created in this pre-lecture. See if you can modify it to do different things, and we'll have some more complicated exercises that we'll practice in class. Thanks again for your attention, and bye for now.